Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't be that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 3 years of law enforcement analysis experience. She spent time with the Indianapolis Metro Police Department and the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. She holds a master's degree majoring in criminal justice. Here to talk about mental health, including PTSD. Please welcome Allison Davids. Allison, how are we doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jason?
I am doing excellent. So we got a lot to go over today. Before I ask you a first question, just want to remind our listeners, we will be doing a Shit You Hear in the Office call-in segment. So if you have a crazy story that you heard in the office, get your calls in now. So, all right, Allison, how did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
I was in graduate school. And at the time, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. And then I took a crime analysis class. And around the same time, IMPD had announced that they were going to start hiring intel analysts. And so I started in that process. Unfortunately, wasn't selected first round, but that piqued my interest to keep working for that.
All right. So then did you get in the second time around then?
I did get in the second time. In between there, I worked for a prosecutor's office.
Okay, so what did you all do for the prosecutor's office?
I started as an intern. I worked about 20 hours a week, and then I was promoted to a legal assistant, and then I was promoted again to a paralegal for drug and gun cases.
Okay, so were you assigned that internship from the school, or had you reached out to the prosecutor's office for an internship?
I had reached out to the prosecutor's office. A friend I had also interned there before, so it was a great segue for him to introduce myself to the hiring manager.
Okay, so then what did you all do as an intern and legal assistant?
As a intern, I did all the fun jobs of really kind of just digitizing most of their caseloads.
Mm-hmm.
I would kind of set up their schedules, get them case files that they would need for the next day, very kind of simpler things. And then that also kind of gave me a really good way to read into police reports, evidence, listen to like dispositions. And then once I promoted to a legal assistant, it was more getting their calendars set. I would file some type of document, so like probable cause affidavits, warrants, etc. And then as I moved up to be a paralegal, I did I would answer like discovery. So when a defense is ready for discovery, I would prepare that, redact things, provide all the information we had. And then if a case was going to trial, I would get all of that evidence ready, get witnesses, subpoenas, all the things that a prosecutor could possibly need that I was able to take care of.
Now, did you have to get any extra training or certifications to be a paralegal?
There is a certification you can get as a paralegal, but it is not required, at least in the state of Indiana.
Okay. All right. So, one of the questions I like to ask my guest is how this internship or how this job that you had before becoming an analyst influenced you becoming an analyst. But it goes without saying that being able to read the police reports and understand the prosecution side of things certainly would have helped you in your career as an analyst.
It was super helpful, and I feel like I would almost, if I could, recommend that to people because it helps you learn so much about what the prosecution side looks like when you're working on a case and when you move into the police side of this is what they're looking for, what they're going to ask. When I worked there as a paralegal or etc., I remember I just wanted to ask all these questions of people's background or who else are they working with, especially if it was a dealing case. And my prosecutor used to always tell us to focus on what you're doing.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I loved digging in then.
Yeah. So then you worked for that prosecutor's office for almost 2 years, right?
Yes, I did.
As you said, you went to the second round of the hiring there at Indianapolis for a PD. What do you think the differences were the first and second time that helped you get through?
I know with the first time as they were setting up their analysis and their intel unit, I think they had a really good idea of who they initially were going to start as their analyst when they opened it up. There was an intern from the ATF that had worked previously with this unit that they really liked. So I think the first round was they really kind of had an idea of exactly what they were looking for and also had an idea of who they were already looking at to kind of get that program standing up. And then the second time, a lot of it was just perseverance and really kind of honing in on the theories, the cycle, kind of the nitty gritty when I didn't have experience with it before.
Okay. How many were they hiring the first time and then the second time?
The first time they were hiring 2, and the second time they also hired 2.
Okay. All right. So yeah, that's interesting. Then panel interview, is that the way it went?
Yes,
All right.
and it was during COVID, of course. So everything was by phone. So you really had to kind of like listen to figure out who was actually talking to you.
Oh man, so it wasn't even a video call, it was just over the phone, like a conference call.
Yeah, and it almost kind of felt like, jokingly, kind of felt like speed dating because it was just like rapid fire. They're like, you have this long and you have this many questions, go. And it's like, oh, okay.
Oh man. So how many were on the panel?
I want to say there were 5 or 6. There were quite a few.
Wow. That is a lot. I think that's a lot, even with that, just having a normal meeting with people where you're trying to collaborate with a bunch of people. That is really hard once you get up to 5, 6. It's just too hard to give equal time to everybody.
Yes, which is why I think it was kind of a speed round, because they knew there were multiple people there that had questions. And I think at that point there were many people kind of with their hands in the fire of what they were looking for in an analyst, whereas now I think it's only 2 people that sit in on their interviews.
So, well, they at least got to know the fact that you can articulate on the phone, if anything.
This is very true, yes.
Right? They know your phone skills are good, right?
Yes.
And so if the interview is by phone, was the actual starting the job remote as well?
It was not. I went into the office.
Okay. All right. It's kind of interesting that they did it that way, I would think. But
I was there like 2 weeks, and then the shutdowns kind of started.
Okay.
So.
All right.
And then we moved to home.
All right. And then how long were you home?
I would say about 6 months.
Wow.
The unit I was working for at the time, they were just a very fast pace. You definitely had to be in the office to keep up with them.
Mm-hmm.
So it really showed how important it was to have the analysts commingle with the officers and the agents we were working with.
I got you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's 6 months. That's a long time, especially when you're first starting. That's a lot to ask in the fast pace, and especially since the officers and detectives that you're working with, they're not working remotely, right? So when you're at meetings, it's just you maybe calling in and everybody else is sitting in a conference room, right?
Yes, and especially like not knowing who anyone is.
Yeah.
How do you kind of, start those conversations or working with someone? It was just some big hurdles in the start.
Yeah, that's a big difference, because I started working from home in 2018 before the pandemic, and a lot of times in the beginning it was me on the conference call with everybody sitting in a conference room, and it's really hard to interject without seeming like you're being rude.
Yes.
Right. It's really, really difficult. I struggled with that. And that's even though I knew the team that I was working with. I had worked with that team for 7 years face to face before I transferred into working remotely. So to me, you have an extra level of difficulty in the fact that not only are you a new analyst, then you don't even know the folks that you're working with.
Yes.
Daunting. Okay. So then, since you're working remotely, 6 months at home, they obviously are giving you some kind of laptop with connection, VPN or something like that, where you're accessing all the databases and data from your house?
Yes, so they actually allowed us to bring one of our monitors that we had also home because it is extremely difficult to impossible to do the work we do from just a laptop.
Oh, okay. I see. So more power in the desktop. I got you.
Yes.
No, that's good. It's so funny, like when I think back about it, because there were so many police departments that would never have allowed remote access into their system before the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, there's no way we're dealing with VPN and security, and I'm going to worry about somebody hacking our system and all this other stuff. But I guess when you don't have a better choice, you choose that route. But now it kind of opens us up. Now that we've went that route, there's no real reason not to do it from time to time.
Yes, it's helpful. It's kind of a good perk now as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it goes both ways because I've talked to some analysts who say, yeah, it's interesting because sometimes a supervisor will ask you to do something after hours
Mm-hmm.
and then turn around and give you a little bit of the side eye if you're going to ask to work remotely on a Friday type thing. So it's kind of odd that happens.
That would be an awkward situation to be in.
So, okay. So as you're setting yourself up then and getting your first 6 months, you're out of the office and you come back in the office and you mentioned that it's fast paced. Like what types of tasks are you doing? What's expected of you?
My first unit that I worked for was a crime gun intelligence center. So, as NIBIN leads would be produced from the crime lab, we would have those tasked to us. At the time, there were 4 analysts and a supervisor. So, we would be in a rotation, and then the case agents would also be in a rotation, which was helpful to get to know who I was working with because I had to talk to them about certain cases that I was on them with. So, I would do a lot of those tasks. So, kind of looking at the police reports, determining if there's a suspect, finding social media, listening to jail calls. I listen to jail calls a lot in that job in general. People would be like, Allison's like the jail call queen. She's always listening to jail calls. I just think it's a great resource. So I tap into it all the time.
Oh.
So, but other than that, that was kind of what we did. We would do a lot of those reports, and then if they were out in the field, we would be on the radio, almost kind of like a dispatch. They would call a plate out, and we would immediately run the plate and then call out who it's registered to. At the time, you had to have a permit to carry in Indiana. We would let them know if they were eligible for that, had that, or if they weren't allowed to have a gun at all. So it was a lot of fast pace, especially they're driving, they call this plate out, like you have to give it to them in like 5 to 10 seconds, or if they make a traffic stop or they're doing a search warrant and find some identification, it's running that person to give them some really good info to steer their investigation.
Man, I would be so bad at that.
It takes a little while.
Considering I am a podcaster and I do well listening to people's conversations, but if you ask me to write down a phone number and I have to do it in 5 seconds, I'm failing over 50% of the time.
It's
right?
hard.
There's no way that I'm getting that number. People and just like rattle off the number and I might get 3-4 numbers in and then I lose the last 6. Like it would be really hard for me to do that.
I feel like there was always a safety net of there's another analyst around you that's also listening, and you're like, all right, I got the first 4 digits. Do you remember what the last 2 were?
Yeah.
And especially when we were learning, they gave a lot of grace of like, they're okay repeating it. Obviously, I'm sure they're not thrilled, but they didn't like belittle you because I think at one point, like they also couldn't remember all the things at once. But I honestly think the weirdest thing was if we had our radios turned up too high and hearing myself talk on someone's radio, I would like pause because I'm like, oh, that's just me. Hearing yourself is weird.
Well, at least you didn't. I hope you didn't get to the point where you were talking to yourself, right?
I didn't. Some days I probably should have, maybe. But yeah, that's just the weirdest part for me is hearing myself.
Yeah, so that is nerve-wracking and very intense, right? Because they're in a situation and calling on you to give them as much information as possible. And so not only are you trying to get the initial information down so you can ask the right questions of the data, but then you have to quickly synthesize all the data, summarize the data, and then get it back to them in some manageable format.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I would almost categorize them as like a violent crimes unit because they're dealing with people that we know have firearms. That's how we identified these people. And so there's also this heightened element of their safety at the same time of, if someone has a prior criminal reckless, or shooting, we definitely want to let them know so they're aware. Or like if they have history of resisting. There's a few key things where you're like, oh, I absolutely need to let them know about this.
Yes. Yes. And then, so how was the data there when you're doing all this? Because there's certain situations where sometimes the data isn't as clean as it should be. And if you're high pace there, you don't necessarily have time to look at 3 different places for data.
Yeah, there's definitely a component missing in that process we were doing of the validity or the reliability of some of this information. Luckily, a lot of the information we were grabbing was from like the BMV or Indiana's criminal history site, where most of the time that data is actually pretty easy to read. If there's an error, it might have been like an entry error on someone from the court system. But for the most part, in that aspect, it wasn't too bad. And, kind of calling out that stuff for the officers. But going back to the NIBIN reports and trying to get that data, there would be some extremely dirty data. Or I think one of my biggest pet peeves, and I'm sure many analysts deal with this, is an officer makes a report and says there were 4 people there, but they only list 2 people in the report. So then you're missing that data and you're like, well, who are these 2 people? Like, it would be really helpful, especially with some of those NIBIN leads. You have to really start creating social network analysis. And that's where the cleaning of the data really had to come in, because names are spelled wrong or date of births are a year off. And so you really kind of have to start using those multiple sources to confirm someone's identity or date of birth.
Yeah. So then was there a step after this incident? Because I can imagine that obviously at this particular time, it's intense, right? Where they're just about to either do a search and seizure or come in contact with the suspects. And so that is obviously intense, but it's not like that 24/7. So there would be some downtime. So after the fact, you go back and clean up your notes, clean up the reports, and trying to shore up some of those loose ends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting process, especially in comparison to what I do now. So it's a different kind of intel analyst job, because I feel like you wear more hats in that role with a crime gun intelligence center than with the sheriff's department, with like what I'm doing now. There's definitely some very different roles.
Hi everyone, my name is Mindy and I am a writer for Analyst Talk with Jason Elder, as well as a current crime analyst. My PSA for our listeners is don't compare your origin stories to others. I used to be super insecure when asked, why do you want to be an analyst or in law enforcement? And I always felt like I had imposter syndrome because I didn't have a good reason. I don't have any family members in law enforcement. I've never been involved in a crime, knock on wood, and I just felt like I had no good reason for being here besides just being interested in the industry. 6 years later, I still don't feel like I have a good answer, but I love my job and I'm pretty good at it. Passion or your calling isn't something that just hits you one day. It is something that's built and maintained over time, day by day, every day. If you're on the fence whether you're cut out for this field, just go for it. If you currently have no reason, make a reason. Make your own origin story. I believe in you.
Hey, this is Mary Craige. My public service announcement for the listeners is irregardless is not a word. It may have been recognized by Webster's Dictionary in 2020, but it is still not a word. It's regardless.
Back to listening to the jail calls.
Yes.
And I'm sure when you said that, I was thinking, has anybody on this show talked about listening to jail calls? And I can't remember if there is or not, but certainly, as you mentioned, that can be a very good resource. So, do you have any either stories or certain things that you gleaned from using this data?
Using jail data to me is amazing because a lot of the times there's a lingo that comes with violent crime or gun crimes when someone says, I have a heat or I have a stick. So you can take the knowledge from the jail calls and compare that to what you're seeing on social media. So that's always kind of a perk. I'm trying to think of a story from a jail call. I feel like jail calls can be all over the place where you'll be like, did I really just hear that? I don't have one coming to mind right now.
Yeah. Way back, I worked with some guys in the Washington-Baltimore hideout who didn't deal with jail calls, but dealt with jail communication, so letters back and forth. And they would tell me interesting stories in that they would talk in code, and sometimes they would put the letter that has the coded information in it and the key for the code in the same envelope. So all they had to do was look at
Goodness.
the key and then substitute like the key in the letter, and they were able to identify what was going on.
I remember working a case in Indy that kind of something similar. There was someone that kept stealing from the same store. And when they finally got the person, in the backpack was a list of all the things that they were there to steal. And I was like, why are you doing this?
Well, he or she couldn't remember them all. That's a
Right.
lot. That's a lot. I just got done telling you I can't remember 4 digits. So if there's more than like 6 items on there, my wife knows that she's texting me the list because she knows I won't remember more than 4. So, all right. This brings us to your analyst badge story. And for those that may be new to the show, the analyst badge story is the career defining case or project that an analyst works. And for you, Allison, it's during this time, 2020, working in this center, and you come across a gun case that you start working on.
Yes. One of the gun cases I was assigned, we had our major I had at the time, there was an email he had got about an uptick in crime in a specific part of the city. And when the evidence technicians were recovering gun casings, the shell casings, they were all 10 millimeters. And at this time, 10 millimeter wasn't extremely common in what we were seeing when we're processing. You have a lot of those 9 millimeters, the 40s, the 45s, but at this time, it was really rare to see 10. And it seemed like in one weekend, there were 15 to 20 casings of a 10 millimeter that were picked up.
Wow.
So, and of course, with COVID, everything's backed up. And so by the time we get these NIBIN leads, we had actually identified who we thought was shooting these casings. And we actually, when looking at the reports, we actually knew where the gun was. But at the time, there wasn't enough probable cause for an officer to write a search warrant on the home to obtain the gun. So as we're working through this, we just keep getting more and more NIBIN leads, and we're connecting. I think at one point we were up to 40 NIBIN leads, which typically for a NIBIN lead, there's at least 2 reports.
Mm-hmm.
So it was involved in many shootings.
So this is just one gun, right?
Yes, this is
Okay.
one gun, one suspect. We later figure out that the suspect's sister's boyfriend also had access to this firearm. And both of them were getting in shootings with various people throughout the city and all over the city, not just specifically an east side or a north side. It was throughout the city.
Okay.
So part of Indianapolis Gun Crime Intelligence Center is they work with federal agents. We literally would sit right next to an ATF agent. So as these NIBIN leads kept coming through, we realized this was a much larger case than our typical 2 NIBIN leads, 3 NIBIN leads, like a few cases connected, where we're talking 20 cases that are connected at this point. So I started working with one of the ATF agents and one of the detectives we had, and we eventually were able to use social media. The suspect we were specifically interested in had went live on Facebook, and we were able to determine where he was based on the surroundings we were seeing in that video. So the officers take off. They're able to apprehend him walking down the street. The gun is on him. So we recover that gun. Very exciting. He ended up his charges were a direct indictment with the federal government. But what makes this story even more exciting is around this time, Operation Legend was occurring through various cities. So during COVID, as most of us are aware, there was a large uptick in violent crime. So the government decides we're going to flood these areas with even more federal agents than they typically would have. Let's combat some of the crime. Indianapolis did an amazing job with Operation Legend. We got a lot of guns, a lot of federal candidates, and overall it was just really successful for the city. I end up kind of explaining the whole case, and at the time, full disclosure, I didn't realize who I was talking to, but I knew there was someone from the government coming, and we were going to give a speech about what the center does and then use this as a success story. So I go through this whole case and I show my social network analysis and all these different things. And when I'm done, I remember thinking, why is everyone treating this guy like he's a really special person? The Secret Service is there. At this point, I'm just not putting two together. But it ends up being Attorney General William Barr, who I'm talking to, and had absolutely no clue. He compliments the case, and I was, really excited just to share it with someone because there were so many hours that went into that. And so we're lining up to take photos, and it finally clicked. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just talked to the Attorney General of the United States. So that ended up being a really big kind of career defining thing to have a picture with him and be able to talk about a case I spent hours on that was super successful.
Yeah, I don't think I can name all the attorney generals in administrations. Unless usually the only ones is if they did something wrong or something.
Right.
There's controversy, but if there's no controversy, you never know who they are. But
yeah,
I find it fascinating they didn't tell you what was going on.
They told me, they're William Barr, and I was like, okay, cool. Just any other day. And then I'm sitting there with the ATF agent, and I was like, I still don't understand. And she's like, Allison, he's an attorney general. I was like, okay. I had worked with prosecutors, so I've worked with people higher up in government for the state. I just wasn't understanding it was the United States Attorney General, not the state one.
Yeah. Oh man. So, well, hey, you made an impression even though you didn't know who you were talking to, and at the end of the day, it shouldn't matter,
Yes.
right? Whether you're talking with a officer or you're talking to the president of the United States, the presentation should be basically the same. You're trying to get he or she to understand what the case was about.
Yes, it was a great experience. And still kind of glad that I probably didn't know ahead of time, because I probably would have been a little more nervous and in my head about it.
Yeah, ignorance is bliss sometimes, right?
Yes, absolutely, especially with that.
All right, question back to when the arrested the suspect, and you said he went live on Facebook. So what was the probable cause? What crossed that barrier to we have enough probable cause now to arrest him?
So when he was walking down the street, they could see a firearm on his person.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe what had happened is they had jaywalked, and they also knew at the time that he was ineligible from having a firearm.
Oh, it's because he was under probation or parole or whatever it is, another violation.
His criminal history was already pretty lengthy.
Okay.
Which is why he wasn't able to have that firearm. But he had jaywalked across the street, and they stopped them for doing that.
Yeah, that's a lot to be in 20 different shootings. One gun, that's a lot. Is the case still in courts, or is it adjudicated?
That I am not sure of. Shortly after I left Indianapolis, he was out on federal monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I didn't follow up when I left.
Yeah, and it's probably going to depend on whether he took a plea or not.
Yes.
Right. But as you mentioned, if there are more federal cases now because of Operation Legend, then you're going to have more cases in the courts and things are going to take longer to get through. So it's possible that it's still being in the process.
And I think Operation Legend even kind of had the backlash of now they have so many cases running through the federal court that they have to be a little more choosy on what they're taking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because most of the time when you talk about federal time, there's no parole,
Correct.
right? When you get 5 years, you're getting 5 years federal time. It's not this, I'll give you 5 and then out in 6 months for good behavior. Usually, right? That's usually the case.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's interesting. All right. Anything else that you think of when you maybe things you walked out of or things you would have done differently had the same scenario popped up? Anything that you got out of the case?
I don't think so. I was pretty happy with how that case went. It was something we were always kind of watching and monitoring. And really, it was kind of a great job of numerous districts kind of coming together when another 10 millimeter case was picked up. They would typically notify us. We would know before the next day or the next morning. They would text one of us to let us know. So it was overall, I was really happy with how it went.
All right. Well, you mentioned your transition to Hamilton County Sheriff's Office. So let's get into that. What made you decide to go to Hamilton County Sheriff's Office?
I mainly wanted a change of pace. Unfortunately, with Indianapolis having so much violent crime, that was most of what I was seeing all the time. So I wanted to change it up and go somewhere it would be a little slower. Because much like we talk about these cycles and these questions, when things are moving so fast, you don't always have the opportunity to actually go through that cycle or sit down and really think about those questions or those intelligence gaps. So I wanted to take a step back. I knew I really liked what I was doing there, but I wanted to be able to kind of expand the other skills that an intel analyst should have.
All right. So then, I guess, what are you getting into now? What types of cases are you working or tasks that you're doing?
So I work narcotics cases predominantly, and then we have 5 districts in total. So I have 2 of those districts. And then on top of that, I also keep track of our gangs that go through our jurisdiction. And we have one specific gang that's specific to our jurisdiction. So I actively monitor them.
You mentioned that it's slower pace, more methodical, dealing with solving problems. What are just some things you're able to accomplish or work on since you've been there?
Absolutely. So great example is this morning I had one of our lieutenants are who run our district, came in and said, this is a kind of a typical request I get of, hey, our council is saying that they feel like we've seen an uptick in crime. Can you give me something that proves or disproves that? What areas do we have, some hot spots, and what do you think we can do about that? We try to really instill the Sarah model in our officers to make them a little more self-reliant, I guess, where they can kind of think through this. So we talk with them a lot and try to get them to realize this and kind of the pros of using this model. So other types of requests I would get are specifically if a officer makes a traffic stop. For example, one of my officers made one a few weeks ago and noticed a certain tattoo on the individual's hand, which we knew to be involved with a gang. So he sent that individual's information to me and what do we know on this guy? So I can do more workup on that. And then I also, specifically where the gang is, I watch for any type of threats, who they're not getting along with, what they're talking about in jail, etc., to try to help them mitigate any threats that could be in the future.
Yeah. Well, it's not a surprise to me that you use the Sarah model, being so close to Cincinnati with John Eck and all, right?
Right.
That's probably a requirement. So as you're going through all of these, because this isn't necessarily a center, right? You're not in a real-time crime center situation, so that certainly takes the intensity off of here. This is more case support as opposed to working for a center and working all hours of the day and dealing with these really intense situations that you were in Indianapolis.
Correct. We are an intelligence unit. We have 3 analysts, a captain, a supervisor, and then we also have an investigator. So we try to just make sure information is flowing to our office, out of our office, so that we really have a great understanding of what's going on in our jurisdiction.
Yeah. Now, do you get to listen to jail calls there at Hamilton County Sheriff's Office?
I did that all morning this morning, Jason.
Man.
Yes, plenty of jail calls.
Yeah, certainly keep you busy, right? And even if, I don't know, if are people doing handwritten letters anymore? I mean, I don't know if you get those access to those.
I don't believe our jail will accept handwritten letters anymore, I think due to possibility of narcotics on them. But our inmates have access to tablets where they can send almost kind of like a text to a person. So we have access to that as well. I can read their text.
Yeah. Hopefully they'll be nice enough to give you the key if there's talking in secret.
Yes, maybe that'll be the text before that gives them the codes.
So I do want to transition now to a more serious topic, and that is dealing with mental health and analysis. You have a unique perspective, so I don't really have a question. I'm just going to give you the floor, and then you can take it to whatever direction you want to take it.
Okay. Yeah, this topic, I think before starting this job, I probably would have never thought about this, but it's a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart now. So when I was at IMPD, one of the great things we got to do is it was pretty normal routine. If the unit was going to work on a case out to do surveillance or a search warrant, if it wasn't your case, you could go out with them. Change of scenery, wouldn't have to be in the office, kind of see what they're doing out there to better understand what your analysis helps with, or maybe kind of add in something else you'd like to think about when you're doing your analysis. We were out one morning and we had just heard over the radio that the SWAT truck had left. And I was riding with one of our agents, and there was one other agent in another car just a block over. We were watching a house, and the agent in the other car had two men approach him, and essentially they tried carjacking him. He was an undercover. We were both in undercover cars, and they tried carjacking him and ended up firing shots, and which in turn kind of created this whole domino effect of it's just the agent, and this other agent out here. I'm obviously unarmed. I can't do anything. So we take off towards that other agent. You know, where did these guys go? Did he get hit? Is he okay? And it kind of put the agent I was riding with in a really tough position, because without me, he would have taken off after the suspect. But the suspect didn't go far. And so does he leave me in the car by myself unarmed? You know, what does that do? So the agent I was with ended up taking off after the suspect. But that just kind of started this possibility in my mind of like the dangers that are out there. So all in all, the suspect was taken into custody, charged federally, was absolutely not supposed to have a gun at all, and was also using some serious drugs at the time.
Was anybody hit?
No one was hit.
No one was hit. Now, I'm trying to visualize this in my mind as you're telling the story. Are you able to see the carjacking as it's going on, or you guys are in communication and you hear about it and then you rushing in?
Correct. So we heard about it. We were only a block away, but the street we were on had quite a few large trees. So most of the time, just the trunks were in the way. Okay. So he had came out on the radio and like yelling shots fired. So we rushed that way. But yeah, no one was hit, which thankfully no one was hit. And then after that, you know, kind of everyone shows up. ATF shows up and kind of takes over the scene of that.
Yeah, now I remember going on ride-alongs and the guy says, if anything happens to me, hit this red button. I guess that would have called somebody back at the district.
And that's what's so helpful in the uniform vehicles, they have those buttons. Yeah. But in an undercover vehicle, it's just a standard like passenger car that either you or I would drive on a daily basis. So we didn't have those things, an error on my part. I didn't take my radio with me. We had a few very old like vests in the back that absolutely heavy. Typically I would grab one of those. That morning I didn't, because I was like, this is going to be fast. This is going to be quick. We'll be in and out. We'll be back in no time. Obviously the morning had other plans. So it was just weird to be in that environment. We hear about it all the time, right? Of these officer involved shootings or someone shooting at the police. And so it was just weird to actually be in that. And then I also felt guilty that the agent I was riding with kind of had to make a decision of, do I leave her here unarmed or do I take off after the suspect? Yeah. So it was a very unique role, many things going through the mind at that moment, right?
Because I've even heard scenarios with ride-alongs that they said, like, hey, if they have to leave you, they might. And I'm thinking, well, they would not have just left you on the side of the road there where a shooting just happened.
He
That
left
was
his door open. His
yeah,
driver's door was open. Car's on. I'm like, if this dude jumps the fence and like hops in this car, what do I do? Do I hop out? Am I going
yeah,
with him? It's just
yeah.
absolute terrible situation.
I do want to get to the impact on you, but to shore up this, in terms of the policy with Indianapolis, did anything change because of this incident?
I wouldn't say anything policy wise. We had never
Hmm.
had at the time we didn't have a policy. But it was for sure the boss I had at the time just saying, like, when you leave, you absolutely have to take these things with you. If you don't
Yeah,
have one of these things with you, you're not leaving.
I see. I
So
see. So this incident had a big impact on you in the days after.
yes, I essentially started thinking about, as I said, I worked for a gun unit. So most of the reports I was reading was all these people getting shot at and all these different things. Where if I like walked outside, I wanted to make sure I could see my surroundings. I wouldn't sit in the car too long because people can get carjacked and shot that way. So my mind was just thinking of all the different ways someone could shoot a gun around me. It made me extremely jumpy, any loud noises. It was just rough for a little while of kind of maintaining a normal life. I wasn't really able to do for quite a few months after that.
So you eventually get diagnosed with PTSD.
Yeah.
How were you diagnosed?
So IMPD has a great program for their officers of if they're experiencing anything mental health wise, they actually have some sworn members that have went to school to be able to help with mental health challenges of officers. So at the time, the captain I had recommended that I go talk to one of them, and I actually did, and they were so helpful. And I remember thinking, and even now sometimes I kind of have to remember this, of even though like analysts aren't out in the field like a sworn officer would be or a detective, we are still taking in so much negative information that is happening to other people, where we can internalize that these situations are reality and these are happening to people. They could happen to me. So I ended up talking to their mental health unit and then went back to a psychiatrist that they recommended me to, which is where I got that diagnosis. And I would say for about 6 to 8 months, the big thing was loud noises.
Mm-hmm.
Was the hardest thing. My body would just take it as, it was those shots fired and kind of go into that fight, flight, or freeze mode.
As you're working through all of this, are you still working for the police
Yes.
department, or did you? Okay. All right.
Yes, I was still working, and for the most part, I didn't really share what I was going through with many people. Even the agent that I had rode with that this happened with, he and I didn't even talk, and it really put a lot of strain on that relationship, which in turn affected other relationships.
Oh, okay. That's too bad. Talking these through, you're getting help, which is obviously the right thing to do. What do you feel was the breakthrough? Was it just a matter of time, or was there a point in time when you felt that, okay, yeah, it's okay, I'm comfortable, just walking around or being in my car, or just sitting here in the parking lot?
I think time helped quite a bit. I think
Mm-hmm.
it was also not feeling as shameful. There was so much shame that I associated with being a civilian, just reading reports, that I should have been stronger or this shouldn't affect me. The one incident, of course, was kind of a big catalyst to all of this, but I just felt a lot of shame that I should be better and stronger, that this stuff shouldn't affect me if I'm working for a police department. Time definitely helped kind of thinking through that. But the other thing was sharing with people around me that, if you make a loud noise, like it actually like really freaks me out. If we can try to just avoid doing that for a little while, just kind of while I worked on calming my nervous system when I would hear something like that.
Yeah. Now, is that still the case, or loud noises don't impact you anymore?
Loud noises still impact me, unfortunately,
Yeah.
but it's not as bad, where if there's a super loud noise, it'll make me jump, but I can definitely kind of self-soothe a lot faster than I used to be able to, or not at all. For the case a while ago, I couldn't self-soothe. It would just startle me and kind of rattle me for the rest of the day.
Analysts listening to this and certainly doing similar work, certainly not dealing with a similar situation that you did, but what advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I think the biggest advice is just to listen to your body, but also know that it's okay that you're taking in all this negative information, and it's natural for your brain to think through these things. Is it's trying to your brain wants to keep you safe.
Hmm.
So it's hanging on to these cues because your brain thinks it's going to protect you in the long run. But when it starts really kind of getting in the way of your everyday life, or you just feel like you have to look over your shoulder all the time, or you're doing things where, you can't just sit in your vehicle and finish the song you want to listen to. Like, it's okay to ask for help as a civilian, because I
Hmm.
really, as a human, we weren't meant to look at negative stuff like we do so many times a day.
So do you think it would have been better if you took a break from the everyday? You talked about the intensity of the center because you've gone through this, you have PTSD, but you're still continuing to read all this negativity. Do you think you would have healed faster maybe if you took a break from reading all that negativity?
I think it would have helped, yes.
Hmm.
I think at the time, I'm not sure that there would have been, that the leadership I directly had would have understood where I was coming from. I don't think that awareness was there yet.
No.
But I definitely think I can feel, even just like now where I'm at, that there's a completely different almost kind of like energy of, I'm not scared to like walk outside where I am, now,
Hmm.
because we don't have crime in our jurisdiction. Cincinnati has quite a bit, but with being the sheriff's department, we don't oversee the city. So there's definitely slowing down and not seeing all those violent things has helped. But
Yeah.
I think at the same time, a big catalyst at that time would have been like a debrief session. So many times when a department or a unit goes through something like an officer involved shooting or some type of large operation, there's typically a debrief at the end. You go back through everything that happened, what could have been better, what do we still need to talk about. This should have been debriefed. And I think those that were involved should have had a lot more conversation than just acting like nothing happened.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
I think it's a
that's deep.
communication piece.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Because certainly to talk through it, to, if anything, just to make sure that everybody's okay, right? I mean, it was a bad situation, and certainly there's some things that could have been done to make it better, but at the same time, to act like nothing happened is doesn't seem like that was the best course of action.
Correct.
So you mentioned the loud noises gave you a response. Have you felt anything from just doing maybe normal analytical work? Has that triggered anything? Just like reading reports or seeing certain stuff around the police department or anything like that?
I think every once in a while there might be a report that just kind of rattles me a little bit, but it's a lot easier now just to kind of take in the information, and I say in one ear and out the other, but kind of in and out. It doesn't affect me like it used to.
You've mentioned it before, is just the shame of it all, right?
Mhm.
Like that's pressure you're putting on yourself, right?
Mhm.
That's something that weight, and that could be almost be your own worst enemy in a way, because you're dealing with all this and you're thinking about, oh, if I only would have done X, Y, and Z, it would have been better. And
Right.
that can be tough, that shame. Because I can think of some of the situations that I had in my life where I had that shame, and it's certainly on a much lower scale than what we were talking about now. But it was hard for me to tell myself that I shouldn't go down that path, that I shouldn't feel the shame. It was really difficult for me to convince myself that it was okay, what's done is done, and you shouldn't have the shame.
I really think right now there's kind of this culture of everyone's getting used to having, I shouldn't say everyone, but departments are getting used to having analysts. And kind of having civilians there to support you or even make recommendations in itself is kind of tricky in this position, as people are still trying to get used to it and kind of accept that. So to create more of a riff than what there already was, I think was a big thing for me. Of, I don't want to turn this little anthill into a mountain. And so I think that's also where a lot of it came from, of I don't want to make a big stink about this. I just want it to go away.
Yeah, and there's definitely something to be said about that. Because as you mentioned, some of the relationships there were strained, even though would be fully in your right to speak up and to bring attention to this, that relationship, that group, it can get further strained by doing that. And so you have to weigh it and you have to say, what's the best course of action for me?
Hmm.
Is what you have to do at the end of the day. All right, Allison. Well, let's take a break. When we come back from the break, a couple more questions, and then we're going to take some calls. Since you're here in the office, we're going to lighten up the conversation as we finish up this interview. You're listening to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Angela Backer-Hines, and I just want to remind you to give yourself a break. As analysts, we strive to have all the officers in our department utilize our skills, and we typically want to be everything to everyone and do everything we can each day. But work is much more manageable and less stressful if you embrace the fact that it's okay to take some time for yourself, and maybe even to say no once in a while. In analysis and in life, you have to give yourself a break or you risk burning out, and then you're no good to anyone. So just remember, it's okay to give yourself a break.
Hi, this is Metre Lewis, and I want to say, make friends with your other analysts. Don't just stay in your own little world, in your own little bubble, but hey, meet the other analysts who work in your jurisdiction, who work in your county, who work in the jurisdictions around you. Have lunch. Go play cards together. Do something together to get to know each other. It will benefit you in the long run.
Welcome back, Allison. One thing I wanted to ask you before we take some calls is you mentioned your master's degree. In this show, I've interviewed people that don't have degrees at all. Some folks have just a certificate, some people have bachelor's, some people have masters. And I'm curious what you think the master's degree did for you in terms of your analytical career.
I think the major contribution of having a master's degree is a lot of the theories that work behind the scenes in what we're doing. So the broken windows theory, for example, it's better understanding what could be going on in the community that would be driving your crime, or what types of interventions might decrease the crime. I think with having a background in psychology, I would have never known these theories, or looking at statistics from a criminal justice angle. And then also I did a really neat GIS class that I would have never had either with my bachelor's degree. So there were just some good core classes where I can see the difference in kind of how I'm thinking about things through an analytical lens in comparison to someone who doesn't have that background.
Yeah, 'cause now that you mentioned that, and I'm thinking back to my time, because I got a bachelor's in criminal justice, and we did have a class on criminology, but it was very, very light, just maybe get the definition of each theory. It wasn't until graduate school there at the University of Cincinnati
Go
that,
Bearcats, I hear.
yes, so that I had a criminology class to where you really dived in, and it is a whole other level of learning
It is.
for some of the stuff.
It puts a lot of analytic. I mean, that's kind of really where my analytical thinking came into, of how can you solve, or how can we kind of think our way out of some of these situations that we're in.
Yeah, so no, and that's where I met Dr. John Eck. But it is different, and it is a way of thinking and a way of writing. And
Yes.
I think most people, when they think of that master's degree or post undergrad degree, that they think it's a bunch of testing and mathematical equations and doing study analysis, and it certainly can be that, but the concepts in this profession, you really get to do a deep dive on some of these core concepts.
We joke here a lot. We have 2 interns that go to UC, and I joke with them all the time that I absolutely would love to be in their shoes, because I love learning and I love school. And so I remember just absolutely loving learning all of these theories and being able to do that deep dive like you were talking about.
Yeah. Huh. See,
I'd
yeah,
go back in a heartbeat.
oh, see, no, once I was done with at UC, I did not want to read another textbook for the rest of my life, and I still don't. Like I enjoyed class time to where you would get together and you would talk about a topic. I really enjoyed that, the discussion aspect of it, but to read another textbook, I think might kill me. All right, good deal, Allison. So let's take some calls now. This segment, Shit You Hear in the Office. This is some crazy office stories or stories that are bizarre that folks either witnessed personally or they heard them talk about in the office. And so, Allison, do you have a Shit You Hear in the Office story?
Oh, I do. I have plenty. I think my favorite one, though, is I had a homicide detective tell me once that what they would have for dinner that night depended on what the crime scene looked like. So if there was Taco Bell in the back of the vehicle, they would go to Taco Bell, or some type of thing that would give them an inclination on what they were going to have for dinner based on a crime scene.
Yeah. See, and I think with somebody that is a layperson that's never worked in a police department, that might be a little shocking to them.
Yes, it's
But
100% a coping mechanism
yeah,
of
but
just dealing with it.
yeah, it's good. But sometimes as you're dealing with some of this stuff, and it's not like he's probably doing it on purpose. It might have a lot of it might have been psychological that he didn't
Yes.
realize it until after a couple of times. Like, I just realized that I ate Taco Bell after seeing a Taco Bell wrapper at a crime scene that day. So certainly he's doing it consciously now, but in the beginning, it might not have been even conscious.
Yep, didn't probably start that way. You are probably very correct.
All right, so we have some callers on the line, and first up is Amanda. Amanda, what's some shit you heard in the office?
One of the interesting things I heard in the office was a friendly argument between two detectives about who was more outdoorsy than the other. And the one suggested that reading outdoorsy magazines is not enough to make you outdoorsy.
I really believe stuff like that happens in any office where you get just two people arguing and the argument just turns really dumb really quickly.
So this one kind of cracks me up because I feel like it's something of like a very like playful argument, but I also feel like it's something people younger would kind of bicker about.
Yeah, probably. I mean,
Very friendly.
yeah, it's very friendly, and yeah, that is some trash talking there. That if that's the only thing that he's going by is the books that he read, and because obviously when you're talking about outdoors, you better have spent time outdoors, right?
Correct. Yes.
Next on the line is Jason. Jason, what's some shit you heard in the office?
We actually had an officer that believes that the earth is flat. And I thought the pandemic must have been a horrible time for him, especially with 6-foot distancing. When I told him that, I really think it pushed him over the edge.
That's a good one, too.
I'm not sure I would call him out on it. I feel like that would start an absolute debate.
Oh, man. It is. It is interesting because the level of organization that it would take for us as a society to convince the world that it's round and not flat is astronomical. Like think about what it would take if the world was really flat and everything that we've ever seen data-wise makes it round. That would be quite a web that we weaved, when we're telling that lie.
Yes, absolutely.
That one does seem a little, someone's going to probably criticize me on this one, but that one seems a little bit like not as harmful. At the end of the day, if you believe the earth is flat, what's the harm in that? Right? I guess if you believe in Santa Claus or you believe in the Easter Bunny or whatever it is, I mean, at the end of the day, what does that do? It's not like some of these other beliefs that people have where it's impacted our society. Like this one doesn't seem like it's really that big of impact.
I agree. That's a good point of view.
All right. Next on the line is Andrew. Andrew, what's some shit you heard in the office?
So some shit I heard in the office was that it was probably my first day on on the job, going out and actually meeting with some of the officers, that there was this individual who rode around town on a bicycle, chainsaw, and he would go around and just do whatever, all over the place. And at first I thought they were messing with me, but then I went out on a ride along and there was a report, and we ended up pulling up on this individual, and there he is sitting there with a chainsaw on his bicycle.
So he didn't really go into too much detail about it. I assume that he's actually doing work with the chainsaw. Like maybe he's actually going around and helping people either cut down limbs or whatever it is. Because obviously, if he's using that chainsaw for intimidation or a weapon, that's going to be a little bit different story. I would hope they wouldn't allow him going around the neighborhood with a chainsaw chasing people on a bike. But, I think we had one in Cincinnati where the person stole a flat screen television and had it on a bike. So
that's some serious balance.
Yeah, you get all kinds of folks. But as I said, if he's actually has a service that he's using that chainsaw for and he's, helping people out and doing it for good, then hey, whether he's on a moped or motorcycle or whatever it is, I guess there's really no harm in that. So, all right. Next on the line is Sabrina. Sabrina, what's some shit you heard in the office?
Meatballs in your pants is not a phrase you hear often or at all, but I had a detective talk to a victim about his ex-girlfriend spreading rumors about him pooping in his pants, or as he phrased it, having meatballs in his pants. How she was able to keep a straight face and continue the interview is unknown to the rest of our unit.
I've never heard that expression. Have you?
No. I'm trying to figure out how often it would have to happen to actually give it a name.
Meatballs in your pants. And it's just so funny. Like, why wouldn't you just say poop in your pants? Like, that's
absolutely
like, because there's not like another reason why you would have a meatball in your pants, right? It was like you're hiding
you
something.
Would hope not.
Meatballs in your pants. So yeah, man, some of the interrogation interviews or some of the interviews that you get from people, I'm sure are pretty wild. Like how people describe certain stuff, and to this guy, that was the way you described poop in your pants, and he was obviously fired up because what did he say? An ex-girlfriend or something was spreading lies about him, according to him, and he's like, no, I'm not the type of person that puts meatballs in my pants. All right. Last one is JV. JV, what's some shit you heard in the office?
Man, I'll tell you. One time I was in the office and I heard these two detectives talking about trying to identify some guy. And what it all boiled down to was two guys fought over a porta potty. There was a long line and this one guy just decided to cut in front of the other one, and they just started duking it out because they couldn't hold it in any longer. And my God, it was quite honestly the S-so.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. 2 poop calls in one day. Man, because that is just something else. But I mean, this goes back to my theory that it's just a matter of how much time you're spending on your Saturday, right? Like, because would you think about it when you hear about these parents that are fighting these referees or umpire at these soccer games or whatever they are on a Saturday? Well, if you're giving up your entire Saturday to watch your kids play soccer and all the effort and time that you are putting in, that your kid is putting in, and then to have a call that you think is bad, not that I'm justifying their behavior, but it's understandable why they're losing their mind because they just gave up their entire Saturday to do this. And now this just happened. And that's why they lose their mind. So in this case, I could see, hey, I got to really go to the bathroom. I've been standing in line for who knows how long. And this person just cut in line. I'm losing my mind. I can't do this anymore. They fight and both end up crapping themselves.
I think this really gives a whole different meaning to shit you hear in the office, though.
That is. So both of them had to tell them, I'm going to put a meatball in your pants.
Yeah, and then yes, and then fighting over a porta potty.
Yeah. So when he first started to say that it was a porta potty, I thought the one guy got in and then the other guy was going to push it over. Like that's what I thought was
Oh, that
going
would
to
be so
happen.
bad.
Yeah, like I think they did that on Jackass. Like, and then if you do it on door side down, like if you tip the porta potty
Oh
down
no.
so it's door side down, like I don't know how you're getting out of there.
I think you kick the top out at that point. I'd
Yeah,
start kicking something, that's for sure.
yeah, that's awful. You know, what's funny is that it opens up, right? And so you got the two guys duking it out and rolling around on the ground, and the third guy probably just passes him and goes into the porta potty.
It goes right in.
All right, very good. Well, that is shit you hear in the office. So if you have a story, a wild story that you've heard or witnessed in the office and want to share it with the show, please contact us at leapodcasts@gmail.com. All right, Allison, glad we were able to lighten up the conversation. Kudos to you for sharing your story. I can't imagine it was easy story to tell, but I do appreciate your perspective and all that you went through. And it sounds like you are on the process of healing. And I just want to commend you for coming on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. So our last segment to the show is Words to the World. And this is where you can promote any idea that you wish. Allison, what are your words to the world?
I think some positivity for some analysts. Be persistent and have perseverance. The work we do is a fairly new concept, and I think having those two characteristics and traits will definitely pay off in the end.
Very good. Well, I leave every guest with you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later. But I do appreciate you being on the show, Allison. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity.